So if we want to have a live system in our game, well, first of all, we're going to need a way of keeping track of it, of course. So let's go into our game manager script. And I'm just going to start out by going into game manager here, and we're just going to keep a variable that will keep track of how many lives we have. So that'll be a public int that we'll just call lives. Actually, no, we'll call it player lives. So that's how many lives we currently have. So we're just going to save that. And then we're going to create a new power-up, a new fourth power-up. So we're going to say public bool is extra life. And then down here, we're going to add a new check to say if is extra life. All this power-up is going to do is basically we're going to again find the game manager. So we're going to say find object of type game manager, and on the game manager we want to say, okay, whatever our current lives are, add 1 onto it. So on the game manager we want to access the player lives and say plus equals 1. So we're just adding 1 onto the player lives, and then we'll destroy our extra life game object. So just destroy game object. So then we're destroying the pickup, and we'll save this and we'll pop back into the game here. So let's go ahead and create ourselves an extra life looking pickup. And what we're going to use for that is back in our art file here. Well, first of all, I'm going to stop this double shot power up, or not stop it, but break it from being a prefab like that. And we're going to rename it to be an extra life. Extra life power up. And then in our art folder, we're going to drop out our sprite sheet, and we're going to grab this tiny little version of our ship, and I'm going to drag that into our sprite slot like this, and that's what we're going to use for our extra lives pickup. So just to demonstrate that this is actually working, we're going to go to our game manager where we can see how many lives our player currently have. We'll start our player off with 3 lives like this. Then we're going to hit play, and when we pick it up, oh, our player lives didn't go up. Why didn't that go up? Because of course it's not going to work very well if we don't actually set it to be an extra life power up. So there we go. We'll play again, and this time if we go to the game manager we should be able to see that it is actually working properly. So there we go, we see it fly in, we pick it up, and we got 4 lives, just the way we wanted to. So that's perfect, that's exactly what we wanted to do. But of course at the moment our lives aren't actually doing anything in our game. So let's go ahead and create a whole life system that will enable us to come back to life when we've been destroyed, and let us be able to play the game for a little bit longer. So now that we have a way to pick up extra lives, let's start taking them away from the player. So we're going to go into our game manager script, and we're going to add a new function down the bottom here that we're going to call public void kill player. So this function is going to be very straightforward. Obviously the first thing it's going to need to do is set our player lives to lose a life. So player lives minus equals 1. So that'll take away 1 from our player lives. The next thing we wanted to do is bring our player back to life and move them to a certain position on the screen. So if our player has lives remaining, so if our player lives is greater than 0, or greater than or equal to 0, sorry. If our player lives is greater than or equal to 0, what we'll want to do is reactivate our player. So say, well actually no, sorry. First thing we want to do is deactivate our player before we move him. So we'll say the player dot game object dot set active is false. Then the next thing we want to do is make sure that the shield is deactivated. Although when our player is deactivated, our shield will automatically be deactivated at the same time, so we actually don't need to worry about that. But we do want to say, okay, if our player has any power-ups, we want to immediately get rid of them. So we're going to say the player's move speed should go back to being whatever it is by default. So the player.move speed is equal to just player speed. So it no longer has the speed power-up. We want to turn our double shot mode to be off. So we'll say the player dot double shot equals false. And we've already established that our shield will be deactivated. when we respawn, it would only really be fair to have our shield be reactivated anyway. So we're going to set that up when we get to the point where we're bringing the player back to where they should be. But now that we've turned all these things off, where are we going to bring the player back when they come into the world? Well, if we want to bring the player back into the world, we need to know where that is. So we're going to have to create a new point on our in our Unity scene here. We'll go to our game manager, and we're going to create a new empty object, and we'll call this the player spawn point, and we'll click and drag this over here, and we'll put it just a little bit back from where they are currently at the moment, but we'll put them right in the middle. So we'll make sure on the y-axis they're at position 0. And then back in our script, what we can do is create a reference to that transform we just created. So we'll, just below our player lives, we'll say public transform player spawn point. And then down here in our player, when our player lives are above 0 and we're resetting our player, we can say, okay, the player.position, or sorry, the player.transform.position should be equal to whatever our player spawn point is. So that'll be player spawn point dot position, like that. And then finally, after we've moved the player into the correct place, we can say, okay, now activate the player again. So the player dot game object dot set active is true, and also activate his shield. So we'll say the player dot shield dot set active true. So our player restarts with a shield to protect them, just that little bit, and we're able to continue on with the game. So that's perfectly fine. That's what will happen when our player has another life to give. So let's actually go ahead and just test this out before we do anything else. So we'll go into the game, we'll let it compile for a second or two, and then in our game manager we need to hook up our player spawn point. So we'll click and drag that into there, and we'll keep our eye on how many player lives we have down here. So once we start the game running, I'm going to fly up and get myself hit by some enemies. Not very well, but there we go. We get sent back, and our player... Oh, we haven't set it up that this function will actually be called by anything else. At the moment, our player is still getting destroyed. So, of course, on our bullet controller, what we want to do now, instead of when we check from the player, we just destroy the player. Instead of that, what we're going to do is... No, instead, we're going to find the game manager. We're going to say find object of type game manager. And on the game manager, we want to run the kill player script, or this kill player function. So we want to do the exact same over in our hurt player script. So here, instead of where we have the shield being deactivated, here we want to say, okay, the player, kill the player instead of destroying them. And while we're here, any objects that we run into, we kind of want them to be destroyed at the same time as the player's being destroyed. So we'll say destroy game object. So we'll save that. We'll go back into the game here, let that compile again, and now this time we should get our player getting exploded and put back into the position they are in. Well, not exploded. We haven't set any kind of explosion for the player. We can do that as well. It might be a little bit interesting to display to our players the dangers of getting hit. So there we go. We get pushed back to our starting point, and you can see our player lives are getting pushed down as we go. We'll destroy that and destroy our ship. Our player lives go down. We've got 0 lives left, and we've run out of enemies to kill us. So that's fine. But as I said, there's nothing kind of happening when our player gets destroyed. So let's go and add an explosion effect when we get destroyed. So on our game manager, below our player spawn point, we'll create a reference to an explosion object. So a public game object that we'll just call explosion. That's fine. And basically all we'll do is down here, before we move the player, we'll just well, before we do anything else, we'll just say instantiate an explosion, and the position is wherever the player currently is. So the player dot transform dot position, and Similarly, the player dot transform dot rotation, like that. So wherever the player is within the world, it'll make an explosion, and then he'll reappear back over at the start. So that's all fine and dandy, but what happens when our player has no lives left? Well, if our player lives aren't greater than or equal to 0, then of course they must be below. So what will happen in that situation? Well, we don't want our player to be reactivated. We do want them to explode. So we'll set explosion to an explosion to go off. We also want to deactivate the player, so we'll grab this like this and we'll pop that in there. And then the final thing we want to do is display a message onto the screen saying, hey, you got killed. So let's go into back into Unity. We're going to add a very quick and simple game over screen into the game, much like we've done previously in our previous projects. To add a bit of a game over screen into the game, we're going to create a new canvas, UI canvas, but instead of just going canvas, we're going to create an image that we'll use. So let's scroll out nice and big. We're going to make this image in the center like that, and then we're going to scale it out so it's bigger than the entire bit of the canvas there. We're going to change the color so it's a nice dark black, and then make it a little bit transparent so it just kind of looks like it's overlaying the world. Like we've done before as well, we want to make sure that that stretches out, so when we have different size windows, it covers the whole window. Then onto this, we're going to add a bit of text. So we're going to say UI text that simply says game over. So we'll make this a little bit bigger, center all that, and make our font size bigger. Perfect. That's all we need to do. We're going to save this, and we're going to go back into our script here. We're going to create a reference to that object now. We're going to create a public game object that we'll call game over screen. And basically, as soon as our player runs out of lives, we want to activate that screen. So we'll just say game over screen dot set active true. So our player has ran out of lives. There's no more hope for them, so we'll pop this up on the screen. So we'll just wait for this to compile, and we'll hook this up in our game manager. Of course, we want to deactivate this by default. We don't want that displaying when our players are just running around in the world. Game manager here. Where's our slot for that? I got our game over screen, so we're gonna pop that in there. We're gonna make our explosion for our enemy, which I never, or for our player, which I never remembered to pop into place. And I'm just gonna zoom back in here on the player. The next thing we're going to do is delete this extra life, because I don't want to get more lives. I want to make sure that our player can't get any more lives at the moment. I'm going to set our player lives down to be 0. So the first time we get destroyed, we should get our game over screen. So I killed one, but oh no, I've been destroyed. Game over. So our level continues going just the way it is in the background, and that's perfectly fine. We can have our level continue going if we want to. Alternatively, what you could do is, as soon as the player gets killed, set our time.timescale equals to 0. So that'll just freeze the level behind us. We won't be able to see any more of what's going on, but that's okay. Our player's been destroyed. We don't need to get a sneak preview of what's ahead of the player. But there you go. That's our live system now in place. So let's go ahead and add some more interesting things into the game and make a way to display our lives on the screen, and also start adding some score for our player to keep track of. So let's start showing our live system that we created to our players. This is going to be nice and basic, pretty much how we've done it in our previous game. My code is just compiling here for some reason. There we go. Now we'll zoom out. We're going to zoom out to our full canvas size. I'm going to add a bit of text to our canvas. So we're going to say UI text. I'm going to make this white so we can see it. A little bit bigger. And we're going to make it say lives space X, however many lives we have. Actually, make that capital letters like that. And then we're going to move this up into the top corner here. If we switch to our game view, we can see how it will actually look in the game. We're going to create another bit of text that we're going to put on the other side over here. And this one will be aligned to the right. And this one is going to say XXX space score. So this will be whatever high score our players can get. Or not high score, but just the basic score our players can get as they play through the game. So first of all, we're going to make sure that our lives are being displayed on the screen possibly, or properly even. So we're going to save this scene just in case we make any weird changes. We're going to go into our game manager. We'll obviously need a reference to our bit of lives text now. So we'll say public text. Oh, we can't do text yet because of course we need to include the Unity Engine UI. So using Unity Engine .ui. Now we can say public text. We'll say lives text for this one. So what do we want our lives text to say? Well, as soon as the game starts, we want our lives text to say, hey, lives text should be lives colon space, and then we add on whatever our current player lives are. So player lives. We want to reuse this same bit of a line down below at the bottom. So when our player is being killed, we take away a life, and then we say, oh, that's how many lives we have left. When our player gets killed, we're going to change it so that it says all lives lost, just like we did on our previous project. All lives lost, like that. We save. So let's go and make sure that this is working in the game, just the way we want it to. Oh, we got a bit of an error. I was looking away for a second. Game Manager on line 37. What have we got? Lives text. Oh, that should be lives text dot text, of course. So we need to do the same down the bottom. It should be lives text dot text here and lives text dot text there. Okay, now we should be okay. So we'll go back in and we'll make sure we hook up our bit of lives text into our game manager, which is here. We got our space, so we'll just click and drop that in there like that. Let's play our game and make sure that's working. We'll start off with 0 lives, just the way we wanted to, and then if we die, all lives. Oh, we need some more space to say all lives lost, so let's actually stretch out that text box then. We're just going to click and drag that out. Now we should be able to see all of that text when we get killed. We could of course just make our font smaller, but that's okay. There we go. All lives lost, game over. Perfect. So that's working fine. We've got our score bit of text up here, but we haven't got a score system in place yet. So let's go ahead and add that into our game manager. Okay, so to add score into our game, we're going to need to open up our game manager. We're going to need a reference, of course, to our bit of score text that we have. So that'll be a public text score text. We'll need a way to keep track of what our current score is. So that'll be our public int current score. And first thing we want to do as soon as the level starts is tell our score text what to say. So we'll tell our score text dot text should be equal to whatever our current score is, because we've kind of reversed the order of how this is laid out on the screen. So it should be current score plus a space, a colon, and then the word score. There we go. So we've got our current score system being added there. So let's go ahead and add the ability for our players to increase our score in the game. So we're going to add a simple little function down here, a public void add score. We'll say int score to add here for how much score we want our players to be able to give. And just make sure that's a small s. Then in between our two curly brackets here, we're going to say, okay, take our current score, add on whatever this new score to add is to it. Oh, no, score to add. and then we want to update what our score text on the screen says. So score text dot text equals current score plus space colon score. Okay, so before we go any further, we just want to make sure that this is outputting properly onto our screen. So although we won't be updating the score just yet, because we haven't added that ability onto any of our objects, what we're going to do is just make sure that as soon as we start the game, this will say our score is 0. Oh, well, I also just realized it's not going to say anything unless we hook it up in our game manager. So we'll go to our game manager and we're going to drag our score text into that slot there. So now we should see it properly. So our current score is 0. We're going to see that pop up as the score here. There we go. Perfect, I can move around like a crazy man. We've got no score, we're not getting any score from our enemies. So let's start adding a way to get score from the enemies themselves. So if we want to add some score whenever we destroy an enemy, we need to know how much they're worth. So to know how much an enemy is worth, we're going to add a simple script to each individual one. We're going to create a C# script that we're just going to call point value. Nice and simple. Open this up. And all this script is going to have is a variable saying how much each individual enemy is worth. We don't need a start or an update or anything like that. We're just going to type in here public int value. So that's however many points this thing is worth. So then all we have to do then is on our bullet controller, whenever we shoot an enemy, what we're going to do is we're going to find the game manager again. Now we could do, when we first find the game manager here, we could set that as an instance of an object, but we're not doing a lot of these game manager finds repeatedly over and over again. We're just doing it when you destroy an enemy, so it's okay to just do it here as well and just say we're going to find the game manager. We're going to use the add score function, and the amount of score we want to add is on our enemy objects. We're going to get the other object that we ran into, because we know that's the enemy. We're going to get the component that's attached to it, which will be our point value script, because we're going to attach that to all our enemies. And then in that script, we're going to get the value from it. So whatever the value is that we've assigned to that enemy, we're going to pull that out whenever we shoot an enemy, and then we're going to pass that into our game manager's add score, and then that'll give a score in our game. So we're going to save this. We're going to go back into Unity, let it compile, and then what we need to do is, first of all, we need to add point value to our enemy prefabs here, like this. So we've got our 4 enemies. I'm going to add the point value script, and just to keep it easy, we're just going to give them all a value of 100. But the thing with how prefabs work in Unity is, although these are individual prefabs that we made, our waves that we made using those prefabs, but they won't carry over because these are completely new prefabs. So the changes we just made to all those prefabs won't be applied to these enemies. So if I scroll down, they don't have the point value script added onto them, but I can add them on here by selecting our 4 individual enemies and giving them the point value script. And again, we can give them all a value of 100, and we'll do the same for our little spinny ships here as well. We'll give them the point value script. We'll give them a value of 100. Nope, apparently we're going to give them 10. No, we'll give them 100, like that. And now those will be applied to the game. So now we can go ahead and test that out in the game itself. And we should see every time we destroy an enemy, we get a bit of score added on. So that one's destroyed. There we go. Whoa, watch out for the bullets. There we go. We're getting lots of score, defeating all the enemies we can find. There's a little bit too many power-ups appearing because I think I left that still on 100, but that's okay. So we've now got our score being added into the game, and we can actually feel a bit more of a sense of accomplishment as we go forward. So now that we've got all our basic systems in our game in place, the main thing that is different about our games from this point on is adding variety to our enemies, giving them different movement patterns, giving them different speeds of firing, giving them different speeds of movement. One of the other basics that we can cover, like we did in our previous project, is feeling the impact of adding sound into our game. But this time, we're not going to just add sound effects to our player, we're also going to add some music into the game. And it's good to see how easy it is to add music into the game too. So all we need to do is go into our audio folder here, and I'm going to go into our resources that came with the project, and we're going to drag both of these folders into our game, like this. We're going to drag them in so that they appear as a separate music and sound effects folder. Now, because this is MP3 that we're dragging in, it can take a little while for Unity to process, so I'm just going to fast forward through this, but you just sit and let Unity work. If it looks like it's frozen, sometimes it can appear like that, but it's okay. It just sometimes takes a little while to process music. Okay, so now that all the sound files are finished importing, let's demonstrate how it goes in the game. We'll use one of these music. I'll go with this one here. All I'm going to do is click and drag it into the world, like this. It's still slightly processing, so it can kind of delay for a second while we drag it in. And basically all we wanted to do is, we wanted to play on awake, and we wanted to loop. And we can position this wherever we wanted to. We'll just put it off the screen just so it's a little bit handy, it's out of the way. We don't have to worry about it obstructing our view when we're placing things in our world. But now we have this bit of sound in our scene. And what you can do is, if you want to have different music on different levels, all you have to do is place a different sound file into the scene when that particular scene starts, and it'll just automatically play that sound for you. So if I go ahead and play the game now, so the bit of music immediately changes how the game feels. It kind of feels a bit more spacey now. We're on a bit of an adventure, trying to find out where we're going. Who knows what's going on? But the music can change the feel of the game. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to delete that music from the scene and pop in this other music. Like this. We'll hit play again. This one suddenly feels a bit more slow and kind of deliberate. But it's all just about what what music you find appropriate for your own game. And finding the sweet spot of which music kind of makes the game feel even better than it did before. So that's how we can add bits of music into the game. And of course, with the music, we can control the volume and all this kind of stuff as well. It's kind of sometimes nicer to put the volume of the music down a bit so that it's not interrupting everything else going on in the game. I'm going to put in the other bit of music because I kind of preferred how that sounded in our game at the moment. Pop that in there. We'll turn it down a little bit. And then we're going to add some sound effects into the game too. Now, in our previous Brick Busters game, we set up our sound effects to play at certain points when our ball hit the different walls, when our ball hit the paddle, when the ball destroyed a brick, all that kind of stuff. We had it through scripting playing those sound effects. But we're going to do a different and much kind of simpler way of handling sound effects by just associating them with different times within our world. So we have some different laser sound effects here. We've got an enemy laser and we've got a player laser. And we know that when our lasers are fired, that's the first time they're entering our world. So what we can do is go to our prefabs here. Go to, say, our player laser. Make sure we have that activated here. Then go back to our sound effects folder here. We have our player laser activated in our inspector still. So we can just click and drag our player laser sound effect and add it as a component. So now it's set to play it as soon as it awakes. We don't want it to loop or anything like that. But now we have our player laser effect automatically playing, and we didn't have to do any scripting to handle it. So we can do the same for our enemy lasers here. We'll highlight our enemy laser, go back to our sound effects folder, and we'll pop that in there. We've also got one for an explosion. So let's go ahead and add that to our explosion prefab. So we highlight our enemy explosion, go back to our sound effects, click and drag that in there. Well, I would if I was scroll down low enough. We need to click and drag it just below where we have add component there. So now we've got an explosion effect. And finally we've got laser impact. So we could make that play through scripting when our lasers impact against an enemy or anything like that. We know we have that in our on trigger enter, so we could do it there. But we know we've also created a prefab for when our bullets impact with something. So we know we're already instantiating a laser impact kind of visual effect. So let's tie that in with a sound effect as well. So we'll go to our prefabs, highlight our laser impact here, and then go back to our sound and click and drag that into position at the bottom like that. There we go. And then we can just hit play and hear all of those sound effects in action. So we'll go into the game. We've got our laser impacts. Suddenly everything kind of sounds a little bit better. We got little explosions when our enemies get destroyed. We got little impacts from our lasers. And of course, when our player gets destroyed, we get the same explosion sound effect. And that's it. That's all we need to do for sound effects in the game. They're nice and simple and straightforward. Of course, there's lots of other things we can do with scripting as well, but we just wanted to show that there's different ways to handle adding sound effects into your game too.